Hello and welcome to another week of Sambo iRacing, and this time I'm going to take a quick look at brake bias, what it is, what it does, how we can actually change it, and why it's so important for people, especially people such as myself who are talent limited, to try and wring those last few tenths or even seconds out of our lap times so that we can try and get the best possible results that we can get. Right, let's start and have a look at it. What is brake bias? Well, brake bias refers to the distribution of braking force between the front and rear wheels of your car. It's represented as a percentage. So if you had an even brake bias between the front and rear, it would be shown as 50%. That's 50% going to the front and 50% going to the rear. In reality, we're going to want to favor the front brakes, and I'll come on to the reasons why. So a 58% brake bias would mean 58% of your braking force is applied to the front of the car, 42 to the rear. Likewise, a brake bias of 56 would mean 56 to the front of the car and 44 to the rear. So now we know what it is. What does it do? Well, if we leave all the other variables as being the same, an increase in your front brake bias will lead to increased stability throughout the car. It's going to be easier to drive. It's going to be safer in wet conditions. Your stopping distances are likely to be longer. You are going to be more likely to lock up your front tires. You are going to have an increase in your front tire wear because they're having to work that much harder. And you're going to be harder to actually rotate the car. Now, on the flip side of that, if you have more rear bias, you are going to have an increase in stopping power. Your braking markers are likely to be one or two car lengths further on down the road, which can be good for overtaking. You're going to be able to have better rotation throughout the corner because your rear is going to be that little bit more loose and allow you to be more pointy, for want of a better word. You are going to have less front tire wear as well. However, the downsides are it's more likely to be challenging to control. You're going to be more likely to lock a rear, and I'll show you the difference between locking a front and a rear in a minute and why that's more dangerous. And you are going to have an increase in tire wear. So let's have a look at doing some cornering with different brake biases and what happens. So as we come down the main straight, I've set the brake bias here to 58%, which for me is more front brake bias than I particularly like. As I come into the braking zone and I go hard on the brakes, what happens is my fronts lock up and I end up understeering through the corner. Now, if I drop my brake bias by 4%, so rather than having 58% front brake, I have 54%. As I come into the braking zone and I brake hard again, rather than locking my fronts, I lock my rear, which is exactly the same as if you're in a car and you pull up your handbrake and you will just spin around on the spot. In this third example, I split the difference. I went with 56%, and as I get into the braking zone, I'm able to threshold brake up to the maximum that I wanted to do and then trail off without locking either the front or rear. Now, I was able to get that from trial and error. That is what we practice for. That's what testing is for. So does that mean I now know that the ideal brake bias for the Super Formula Lights is 56%? No, it means it was ideal for that corner, for those conditions on that day with my driving style. It's never going to be too far off that, maybe a percentage point either way, but it's something that you need to test for yourself. So you've got to work out what's more important, what's the most important corner on the track, how your driving style is going to be, because as you can see, if you have a braking point here using 58% brake bias, you are aware that you're going to be able to brake slightly harder if you have a lower brake bias, such as 56%. It can be handy if you're going in to try and make an overtake. What you should be doing, or what you can be doing, and what some more advanced drivers do, is they alter their brake bias on the fly during the race to account for the different corners that they're coming into. It's what we see all Formula One drivers do. How to do that, I'll show you now. So what we do is from the options menu, we can go into options once again. We only need to do this the once. So we go on options, and then you can go on control underneath the done, and then you can set on your in-car adjustments a brake bias set. So if you click on that, you'll then be able to assign two buttons. Once you've clicked on it, you can assign a button to increase brake bias and a button to decrease it. That will allow you to make adjustments whilst you're actually on the within the cockpit, and it will make it that much easier to fine tune your brake bias during the race. So when we're in the cockpit, whilst you can do it from the black box, it's a lot easier, as you can see there, Just by pressing up and down on those two buttons that you've assigned, it will allow you to make fine-tuned adjustments during the race, during any practice, and you'll be able to get exactly where you need to be. So to sum up, if you are a beginner, it's definitely advisable to start off with more front brake bias just to have more control and more stability in your car. If you're at a track that has high speed sweeping corners and you need to know that when you touch the brake, you're not going to lock up your rears, again, more front brake bias would be recommended. And if you are racing in the wet, definitely go more front than you would do in the dry. To have more rear bias. That would suit more advanced drivers or tracks that have got long straights followed by a heavy braking zone, such as Monza for turn one, or for turn five, as you've already seen at Okayama, or for scenarios where enhanced corner rotation is going to be crucial to you, or if you're wanting to overtake and you want to brake slightly later than the car in front. But it's important to remember that not all cars are the same. So GT cars will need far more front brake bias than downforce formula cars. Always try and spend 5 minutes to find the right brake bias for your driving style for each car and for each track and their conditions each week. It sounds like a lot, but basically it just means that, when you first start testing or you're in a practice session before going into race with 20 minutes to go, just try different things, see where you are locking up your fronts or if you're locking up your rears, and just try and find the sweet spot for yourself. Do assign buttons on your wheel rim to make any changes easier to make whilst you're out on the track, so you don't have to mess about with a black box during your race. The default brake bias that iRacing prepares, either in fixed setups or fixed for each track, are generally going to be within a percentage or two of what will be correct for yourself. And iRacing setups are always on the safe side, so they're always more front brake bias sort of loaded than they are rear. So that's important to know as you're starting out here. And hard braking zones after a long straight favor more rear braking, whilst high speed flowing corners favor more front brake bias. If you don't wish to move your brake bias during a race, then it's best to set your percentage on the fast flowing corners, because it's far better to have a lockup going into a hard braking zone than it is actually just turning your car straight around whilst you're in the middle of a high speed corner. So that's it on brake bias. Any questions, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the week. I've been Sambo iRacing. Thanks.